Good evening. We can do better than that. Oh, yeah. I like it. I'm Kevin Young. I'm a poet sometimes, and a nonfiction writer in many ways because of James Baldwin, whom we're celebrating tonight. Poet, fiction writer, and essayist. Baldwin would have been 90 last year, so this is a belated birthday. I think of him a lot, and I'm going to introduce the three readers and talkers we have tonight, the three brilliant writers. But first, I wanted to tell you a quick anecdote. I'm something of a book collector, mostly out of necessity of trying to find the books I love that I couldn't find in libraries. Now I work in one as a curator. But before I did, I used to get the occasional rare book. I have a beautiful copy of Go Tell It on the Mountain, which means a lot to me, Baldwin's first book and his first novel. My favorite book, perhaps in the world, but certainly of Baldwin's, is Giovanni's Room, his second novel. And I found a copy of it signed to a fellow writer named Owen Dodson, a writer you should look up. He's a terrific writer. Many years later, it turns out we have his archive at Emory University where I teach. But finding these books, which I heard later that when Dodson died, many of his books were just put to the curb and left adrift. And so I think of it as rescuing this book, having it. And one of the things, what he says is, Jimmy says to Owen, keep the faith, Jimmy. So tonight we're keeping the faith and thinking of Baldwin and talking about him as well. The three writers here are going to read in order, then you're going to see me again, and then we're going to talk for a little bit. So first will be Amy Bloom, who is the author of 5 fiction collections. And I fell in love with her saying that she would have a dinner party for Baldwin. Well, not just for Baldwin, but he would be one of the people she would have there. And she says, for him, I would make grilled lamb green bean salad with hazelnuts and creme fraiche, and a citron pressé with a shot of vodka. Because to receive a smile from James Baldwin, nothing could be too much trouble. And when I saw that, I said, well, we have to have her speak. And I have to be at that party. Nikky Finney, who will be next. Nikky Finney will be next. And she's the author of 4 books of poetry and a collection of short stories. You can read more about them in the program. I'm just going to give you the précis on these great writers. She's a founder of the Affrilation Poets, a wonderful group. And her book, Head Off and Split, won the National Book Award in 2011. It's a terrific collection with a great cover. Love that cover. Randall Kenan, too, is a terrific novelist and fiction writer. We were just reminiscing about, I put him in an anthology of younger writers. I can't remember when it was. We were younger. So, in 2000, called Giant Steps, with a terrific piece, one of my favorite short stories, really, about a hog haunting a certain gentleman. So I think of his southern roots and his southern work, much as with Nikky Finney. He already has a beautiful book, The Cross of Redemption, The Uncollected Writings of James Baldwin, which I hope you already have. And his book, The Fire, this time, helps title our evening. So without further ado, I'm going to send it over to Amy Bloom.
It is an honor to be here. I wish it was actually James Baldwin's birthday party, and I was here with these 3 writers, and we could celebrate him in life as we wish to do now. One of the things that Baldwin wrote at one point was that we are all helplessly and mysteriously within each other. White into black, black into white, male into female, female into male. Darryl Pinckney said about his work, there is something wild in the beauty of Baldwin's sentences and the cool of his tone, something improbable too, the meeting of Henry James, the Bible, and Harlem. I think that is true. I think it is one of the most beautiful things about Giovanni's room. And I will read a little bit from that, and then a little bit from something in my own work. This is the narrator talking about a relationship he had when he was younger. People are too various to be treated so lightly. I am too various to be trusted. If this were not so, I would not be alone in this house tonight. I repent now for all the good it does. One particular lie among the many lies I've told, lived, and believed. This is a lie which I told to Giovanni, but never succeeded in making him believe that I had never slept with a boy before. I had decided that I never would again. There is something fantastic in the spectacle I now present to myself of having run so far, so hard, across the ocean even, only to find myself brought up short once more before the bulldog in my own backyard, the yard in the meantime having grown smaller and the bulldog bigger. I have not thought of that boy Joey for many years, but I see him quite clearly tonight. It was several years ago. I was still in my teens. He was a very nice boy, too, very quick and dark and always laughing. And for a while, he was my best friend. Later, the idea that such a person could have been my best friend was proof of some horrifying taint in me, so I forgot him. But I see him very well tonight. We lived in Brooklyn in those days, but in a better neighborhood than Joey's. I think we had been lying around the beach, swimming a little, and watching the near-naked girls pass, whistling at them and laughing. And I am sure that if any of the girls we whistled at that day had shown any signs of responding, the ocean would not have been deep enough to drown out our shame and terror. But the girls, no doubt, had some intimation of this, possibly from the way we whistled, and they ignored us. And as the sun was setting, we started up the boardwalk towards his house with our wet bathing trunks on under our trousers. I think it began in the shower. I know that I felt something as we were horsing around in that small, steamy room, stinging each other with wet towels, which I had not felt before, which mysteriously and yet aimlessly included him. I remember in myself a heavy reluctance to get dressed, and I blamed it on the heat. But we did get dressed, sort of, when we ate cold things out of his icebox, and we drank a lot of beer. And I remember walking down the dark, tropical Brooklyn streets with heat coming up from the pavements and banging from the walls of the houses with enough force to kill a man, with all the world's grown-ups, it seemed, sitting shrill and disheveled on the stoops, and all the world's children on the sidewalks or in the gutters or hanging from the fire escapes, with my arm around Joey's shoulder. I was proud, I think, because his head came just below my ear, and we were walking along, and Joey was making dirty wisecracks, and we were laughing. It's odd to remember for the first time in so long how good I felt that night, how fond of Joey. We sleepily got undressed and went to bed, and I fell asleep, but I woke up to find the light on and Joey examining the pillow with great, ferocious care. What's the matter? I think a bed bug bit me. You slob, you have bed bugs? I think one bit me. Did you ever have a bed bug bite you before? No. Go back to sleep, I said, you're dreaming. And he looked at me with his mouth open and his dark eyes very big, and it was as though he had just discovered that I was an expert on bed bugs. I laughed and I grabbed his head as I had done God knows how many times before, but this time when I touched him, something happened in him and in me which made this touch different from any touch either of us had ever known. And he did not resist, as he usually did, but lay where I had pulled him against my chest. And my heart was beating in an awful way, and Joey was trembling against me, and the light in the room was very bright and hot. I started to move. Joey mumbled something. Joey raised his head as I lowered mine, and we kissed, as it were, by accident. And then, for the first time in my life, I was really aware of another person's body, of another person's smell. We had our arms around each other. It was like holding in my hands some rare, exhausted, nearly doomed bird, which I had miraculously happened to find. I was very frightened. I am sure he was frightened too. and we shut our eyes. To remember it so clearly, so painfully tonight tells me that I have never, for an instant, truly forgotten. I feel in myself now a faint, a dreadful stirring of what so overwhelmingly stirred in me then, great thirsty heat and trembling and tenderness so painful I thought my heart would burst. But out of this astounding, intolerable pain came joy. We gave each other joy that night. It seemed then that a lifetime would not be long enough for me to act with Joey the act of love. But that lifetime was short. It was bounded by that night. It ended in the morning. I awoke while Joey was still sleeping, curled like a baby on his side toward me. The power and the promise and the mystery of that body made me suddenly afraid. A cavern opened in my mind, black, full of rumor, suggestion, of half-heard, half-forgotten, half-understood stories full of dirty words, and I saw my future in that cavern, and I was afraid. And I could have cried for shame and terror, cried for not understanding how this could have happened to me, how this could have happened in me, and I made my decision. I got out of bed and took a shower, and I was dressed and had my breakfast ready when Joey woke up. One of the things that Baldwin says is that to be sensual is to respect and rejoice in the force of life itself, and to be present in all that one does, from the effort of loving to the making of bread. He also says, and this I have on a note card above my desk, be careful what you set your heart upon, for it will surely be yours. And finally, and I think one of the things that has kept me so engaged with Baldwin for so long, not just the beautiful, often dense, supple, brocaded sentences of Giovanni's Room, but he writes, passion is not friendly. It is arrogant, superbly contemptuous of all that is not itself. It has a might. It contains a challenge. It contains an unspeakable hope. I think that no one in the world writes as eloquently about love as James Baldwin. It's a story about two middle-aged people who find themselves falling in love. Later in life, they break up their marriages and come together. Claire and William. Claire called William every half hour from 10 until midnight, and then she told herself he must have fallen asleep early, and she called him at his university office and on his cell phone and at home, and she called him every 15 minutes from 7 a.m. until her talk, and then she began calling him again at 11 as soon as her talk was over. She wondered who to call. She couldn't picture what might have happened to William. His face floated before her, his large, lovely face. His face when he was reading the paper, his face when he had said to her 5 years ago, I am sorry. And she had thought, oh, Christ, we're breaking up again? I thought we would go until spring at least. And then he had said, you are everything to me. I am so sorry. I am afraid we have to marry. And they cried so hard, they sat down on the bench outside the diner, and they wiped each other's faces with napkins. Claire saw that the man in the seat across from her on the train was smiling uncertainly. She must have been saying William's name. Claire pulled into their driveway just as the sun was setting, and Margaret pulled in right behind her. Water was still dripping from the gutters and the corners of the house, and it would all freeze again at night. Oh, Claire, Margaret said, are you going in? It's all right, Claire said, and they both looked up at the light in William's window. Claire scrabbled in the bottom of her bag for the house key, furiously tossing tissues and pens and chapsticks and quarters onto the walk and thinking with every toss, what is your hurry? This is your last moment of not knowing, stupid. Slow down. But her hands moved fast, tearing the silk lining of the bag until she saw out of the corner of her eye a brass house key. She wanted to sit down on the porch and wait for someone else to come. She opened the door and she wanted to turn around and close it behind her. She should call his name, she thought. It's what you do when you come into your house and you haven't been able to reach your husband. You go, William, William, darling, I'm home. And then he pulls himself out of his green leather desk chair and comes to the top of the stairs, his hair standing straight up and his glasses on the end of his nose. And he says, relief and annoyance clearly mixed together, darling, you didn't call. I waited for your call. And you say, I did call. I called all night, but the phone was off the hook. And he says it certainly was not. And then your sons and their wives and the babies come, and it is no more or less terrible to have them in the house before the funeral. You move slowly and carefully, swimming through a deep but traversable river of shit. You must not inhale. You must not stop. You must not stop for anything at all. And destroyed and untouchable, you can lie down on the other side when everyone has gone home after the funeral. Claire took the semester off. She made no phone calls. She watched a show every week, the most repulsive and irresistible show she had ever seen. 3, sometimes 4 women sat around and said things like, "It's not an ending, it's a beginning." What made it bearable to Claire was that the women were all ardent Catholics and not like her, except the discussion leader, who was so obviously Jewish and from the Bronx that Claire had to Google her and find out that she had had a PhD in philosophical something and converted to Catholicism after a personal tragedy. So Claire got to listen to a woman who sounded a lot like her great-aunt Frida say, "I pray for all widows, and we must all keep on with our faith and never forget that Jesus meets every need." And Claire was waiting for the punchline, for the woman to yank her cross off her neck and say, "And if you believe that, blah, I've got a bridge I'd like to sell you." But she never did. The woman did sometimes say, "Isn't it interesting that so many women saints come to their sainthood through being widows? They were poor and desperate, alone in the world with no protection, but the sisters took them in and even educated their children. Isn't it interesting that widowhood led them to become saints and extraordinary women, to know themselves and Jesus better?" And the other widows, the real Catholics, didn't look interested at all. When Claire turns off the TV show, there is a raccoon in her kitchen on the counter. It, although Claire immediately thinks he, is eating a slice of bread. He's holding it in his small, nimble, and very human black hands. He looks at her over the edge of the bread like a man peering over his reading glasses. A fat, bold, imperturbable man with a twinkle in his dark eyes. And even though she knows better, even though William would have been very annoyed at her for doing so, Claire says softly, "William?" The raccoon doesn't answer, and Claire smiles. She wouldn't have wanted the raccoon to say, "Claire?" Because then she would have had to call her sons and have herself committed, and although this is not the life she hoped to have without William, it is certainly better than being in a psychiatric hospital. The raccoon has started on his second slice of bread. Claire would like to put out the orange marmalade and a little plate of honey. She wants to open a jar of peanut butter for the raccoon. She has read that they love peanut butter, and she does not want him to leave. In an ideal world, the raccoon would give Claire advice. He would speak to her like Kuan Yin, the Buddhist goddess of compassion and mercy. Or he would speak to her like St. Paula, the patron saint of widows, about whom Claire has heard so much lately. Claire says to the raccoon without moving, "And why is St. Paula a saint? She dumps her 4 kids at a convent after the youngest dies. She runs off with St. Jerome. How is that a saint? You have shitty mothers all over America who would love to dump their kids and travel." The raccoon nibbles at the crust. "Oh, it's very hard," Claire says, sitting down slowly and not too close to the raccoon. "I miss him so much. I didn't know. I didn't know that I would be like this, that this is what happens when you love someone like that. I had no idea. No one says there's no happy ending at all. No one says, if you could look ahead, you might want to stop now. I know. I was lucky. I was luckier than anyone to have had what I had. I know now. I do, really," she says. And the raccoon picks up 2 large crumbs and tosses them into his mouth. He scans the counter and the canisters, and he looks closely at Claire. He hops down from the counter to the kitchen stool and onto the floor, and he strolls out the kitchen door. Thank you.